I noticed her on the first day. Not the way most people notice a child who isn't talking. I wasn't alarmed, the way the mother was, quietly, the kind of alarm that doesn't show on the face but lives behind the eyes. I didn't lean in or crouch down or do any of the things that send a child of that kind straight to the wall. I just saw her. A small girl in a yellow coat, standing at the edge of the courtyard while the movers carried boxes through the side door. Her hands folded. Her face still. Watching the potted ferns along the south wall the way a person watches water move, not because they're waiting for something, but because being still is the only thing that feels safe. I've seen that stillness before. For 29 years I saw it almost every day. My name is Cal Mercer. I'm 56 years old. I fix things for a living now, the boiler in the basement of Harmon Court, the broken storm latches on the second floor, the cracked baseboards in 1A that the previous tenant walked right through. I've been the maintenanceman here for 4 years, and I can tell you the squeak of every hinge in the building. The residents know my face the way they know the mailboxes, they register it without seeing it. That's all right. I made my peace with invisible a long time ago. After my wife, Ellen, passed, Iris was 12 then, and I was not going to miss a year of her growing up for anything. I closed the practice, took this job because it kept me close to the school, and I learned how to be useful in a different way. Iris is at college now. I have the apartment in 1C and the courtyard and the ferns, and most days that's enough. The woman in 3B moved in on a Thursday. Her name was on the lease as Miriam Solano. I found that out from the super, who found it out from the management company. I didn't need to know anything else. I brought up 2 replacement cabinet hinges that afternoon and set them on the kitchen counter without her having to ask. She thanked me without looking up from her laptop. She was on a call. She was always on a call. The little girl was in the hallway behind her, facing the wall, one hand against it like she was reading the texture of the paint with her fingertips. I set the hinges down quietly and left. That night I thought about what I had seen in the courtyard. The folded hands. The quality of the stillness. I'd spent nearly 3 decades working with children who had stopped trusting language, who had decided, for one reason or another, that words were no longer safe to send out into the world. Some of them came back to talking in 6 weeks. Some took 2 years. A few of them taught me more about patience than any training I'd ever had. The ones who came back the hardest and fullest were always the ones who came back on their own timetable, never mine. I wasn't going to do anything. It wasn't my place anymore. But the next morning I found a small wooden puzzle I'd made for Iris when she was about 7, interlocking birds, 6 pieces, and I left it on the 3rd floor hallway windowsill outside 3B with a note that said, "For the birds." No signature. I went back downstairs and fixed the latch on the courtyard gate. 2 days later the puzzle was gone. In its place was one of the birds, separated out from the rest, laid on the sill like it had been set there deliberately. I looked at it for a long time. Then I took it inside and painted it red and put it back. I didn't push. I never push. That was the first thing I learned. Over the next week I left a few more small things near the sill or on the courtyard bench, a smooth painted stone the color of a winter sky, a pinwheel that turned in any light wind, a small folded paper crane I'd learned to make from a woman in my building who had come from Kyoto. Nothing that asked for a response. Nothing that required anything of anyone. I just wanted her to know the world wasn't only sharp corners. By the 2nd week, Nora was appearing in the courtyard. I know her name because I heard her mother say it once, gently, from the stairwell. "Nora. Come inside." And Nora came, without argument, without drama, without a word. She was precise in that way, she did what was asked of her, she caused no trouble, she moved through the world like someone who had decided to take up as little space as possible. She began standing at the courtyard door in the mornings, while I worked. I am not a loud man. I don't play music while I work, and I don't fill silence with chatter. I have a habit of talking to the ferns. Ellen thought it was ridiculous and then she started doing it herself, and I kept that up. I told the fern nearest the gate that it was getting leggy and needed more light, and I moved it 6 inches. I told the one by the iron bench that it was doing well and I was proud of it. I don't know if plants hear anything. I know children do. By the end of the 2nd week, Nora was on the stoop. By the middle of the 3rd week, she was sitting on the ground near the bench, her back against the courtyard wall, watching my hands while I worked. I was fixing a section of iron fencing that had gone soft at the base, rust getting in under the paint, and I worked slowly and without rushing, the way I always did. I hummed a little. One of Ellen's songs. Something she used to hum while she read. I didn't look at Nora directly. I learned that early too. Some children read a direct gaze as an ask, a demand. You look at a point nearby. You let them feel you without aiming yourself at them. After a while I pulled out a small sketchbook I carry in my jacket pocket and I drew a bird. A plain sparrow. I set the sketchbook on the bench beside me, open, and went back to the fencing. I could feel her moving closer. By the time I finished the repair, she was standing at the end of the bench, looking at the sparrow. I slid the sketchbook toward her. She didn't touch it. But she looked at it for a long time. The mornings built. Each one a few inches closer, a few minutes longer. I did not count them or measure them or try to figure out what they were adding up to. You can't rush a thing like this. The moment you start treating it as a project, as a goal with a timeline attached, you've already broken it. I knew that from the beginning. These children don't need to be fixed. They need someone to sit still long enough for them to believe that the world will hold. Miriam, her mother, I saw in passing. She was a woman running fast in multiple directions, and she was doing it with extraordinary control. Pressed suits. A phone that never seemed to leave her hand. She had the look of someone who is also carrying something they do not talk about, and carrying it alone. Once, coming out of the elevator with a coffee in each hand, she nodded at me. I nodded back. That was the fullest conversation we'd had in 3 weeks. On a Wednesday morning I passed the 3rd floor and heard voices in 3B. A man's voice, professional and clipped, then Miriam's low and tight. I didn't slow down. But I recognized the cadence. Specialist. 3rd one, I'd heard through the building's paper-thin gossip, in the 6 months since they'd moved to the city. I kept my head down and went to fix a smoke detector on the 2nd floor that had been chirping since Sunday. It was a Thursday afternoon when it happened. I was on the courtyard bench with my sketchbook, doing nothing in particular, drawing the fern by the gate, adding shadow to the fronds, when the door to the stairwell opened. I assumed it was a resident coming through. I didn't look up. Footsteps. Small ones. I kept my pencil moving. The footsteps came across the courtyard. I could hear them on the flagstone, each one deliberate, each one decided. 12 steps, maybe. And then they stopped. I set my pencil down. Not fast. I set it down the way you set down something fragile, and I looked at my hands for a moment, and then I looked up. She was standing 2 feet in front of me in a yellow coat that was slightly too big and boots with the left buckle undone. Her hands were at her sides. Not folded. At her sides. Her eyes were dark brown and absolutely steady, looking at my face the way she had looked at the sparrow drawing, with a kind of careful attention that most adults have given up on by 30. She didn't move. Neither did I. I waited the way I have learned to wait, which is not holding your breath but breathing normally, and not wearing a particular expression, just being present in your own face without asking for anything with it. And then she said it. Cal. 1 word. Clear as a struck note. My name, in a voice I hadn't heard before because it hadn't been used in 6 months. I looked at her. I said, "There you are." That was all. She sat down on the bench beside me. I opened the sketchbook to a clean page and handed her the pencil, and she drew something that might have been a bird or might have been a tree, and neither of us said anything for a little while, and that was exactly right. I became aware of a sound above us. I looked up. Miriam Solano was standing at the 3rd floor window. She had one hand on the frame, the other pressed flat against her chest. She was looking down at her daughter sitting on that iron bench, drawing, and she was not on a call. She was not moving. She stood there for a long moment, and then she stepped back from the window. A minute later the stairwell door opened. She came out into the courtyard in her work clothes, no jacket, as if she hadn't planned to stay long but had come down anyway. She stopped when she saw Nora, really stopped, the full kind, and she stood there and watched her daughter fill in a wing on that page. Then she looked at me. I'm used to being looked at as furniture. This was different. This was someone seeing a person for the first time who had been there all along, trying to remember how they had missed it. She sat down on the other side of Nora. After a while she said, quietly, "What did you do?" I thought about how to answer that. "Nothing, mostly," I said. I left her some room. Miriam was quiet. Nora was still drawing, the pencil moving in slow, deliberate strokes. "She hasn't spoken in 6 months, Miriam said. She said it the way you say something you've been carrying so long the weight of it has changed shape." "I know," I said. "I could tell, the first day." She looked at me again. "How?" I told her, then, not all of it, not the 29 years in full, but enough. The practice I'd had, the children I'd worked with, the particular kind of listening that selective mutism requires. The patience it takes to let a child find the edge of their own silence and decide, on their own, what's on the other side of it. I told her I hadn't set out to do anything. I'd just done what felt right, which is sometimes the same thing as doing what you know. Miriam listened without interrupting. Nora drew a second bird beside the first one. When I finished, Miriam was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You're the handyman." "I am," I said. "You fixed the cabinet hinges." "I did." She looked at the ferns along the wall, the pinwheel still turning near the gate, the painted stone on the edge of the bench. She put it together slowly and completely, and I watched her do it, and I didn't say anything to help or hurry it along. The light in the courtyard was going golden, that particular late afternoon angle that makes everything look like it's been kept somewhere safe and let back out. Nora set the pencil down and looked at what she'd drawn, 2 birds, side by side, the wings a little uneven but the shapes clear. She picked up the sketchbook and held it out toward her mother. Miriam took it. She held it with both hands and looked at it for a long time. "Cal," Nora said again, softer this time, like she was testing to make sure the words still worked. "Right here," I said. We sat there until the light changed. The 3 of us on an old iron bench, in a courtyard I've tended for 4 years without anyone much noticing, among ferns that I talk to and a pinwheel that turns in any wind at all. Nora fell asleep against her mother's arm before the hour was out. Miriam didn't move to take her upstairs. She just put her phone in her pocket and kept her arm around her daughter and let the evening come. I've spent a long time learning the difference between silence that traps a person and silence that holds them. That evening, it held all 3 of us just fine.